I'm going to be talking today about happiness, success, about life and death and meaning, the stuff that really matters. We all want to be happy. It seems self-evident that happiness is desirable, but is happiness enough? People have been wrestling with this question for thousands of years. The epic ancient Greek poem, the Odyssey, was written almost 3,000 years ago. In one episode, the hero Odysseus and his men arrive in the land of the lotus eaters, who live on a food that comes from a kind of flower. The lotus eaters give 3 of Odysseus's men some lotus, which they find delicious. They stop caring about everything else. They stop caring about their years-long quest to find their way back home. They don't even bother coming back to the crew to tell them what had happened. They are content to eat lotus the rest of their lives. Odysseus forces these 3 back onto the ship, despite their weeping bitterly at being taken away from the lotus. Odysseus ties them up under the ship's benches, forbids any of his other men from eating lotus, and they immediately row away from that land. In Odysseus's view, being perfectly happy eating lotus for the rest of your life is not good enough. A more modern version of this question came up in the movie The Matrix. The premise of the movie, for the 2 of you that haven't seen it, is that humanity has been enslaved by machines. But we don't know it because our brains have been hooked into the Matrix, which creates a virtual reality experience that we think is real. The hero of the movie, Neo, chooses to escape the Matrix, discover the grim reality that he's really living in, and he wants to fight against the machines. But one of the human crew, Cypher, decides that he's going to betray the cause. He cuts a deal with the machines where he gets to return to the Matrix. Cypher tells the machine villain, Agent Smith, I know this steak doesn't exist. I know that when I put it in my mouth, the Matrix is telling my brain that it is juicy and delicious. After 9 years, you know what I realized? Ignorance is bliss. I don't want to remember nothing. You understand? And I want to be rich. Someone important like an actor. The movie's point of view is clear. Cypher is doing a bad thing. Being rich and famous in the Matrix is worse than being hunted, deprived, but fighting for freedom in the real world. In the real world, in our world today, we have drugs that can induce feelings of intense happiness, at least for a while. What if we could live the rest of our lives continually dosed on these drugs, doing nothing else? You might say, that's really bad for your health. Your body will waste away. You'll die soon. But now you're raising a technological objection. What if drug technology advanced so that we someday develop a narcotic that would keep you perfectly healthy? Would you want to do nothing else with the rest of your life but take that drug? I think that most of us would say that we would not. And I would guess that even for those who would choose to take such a drug, they wouldn't describe a life lived in this way as an admirable life. So we too are saying that happiness alone is not sufficient to make a life good. Let's pin that thought for a moment and consider actually accomplishing something in the real world. You guys are students at one of the most prestigious universities in the world, so I imagine that most of you have some level of worldly ambition. Take a few seconds to think about what achieving your professional dream would look like. The actual moment where you think, wow, my dreams have come true. So what did you think about? The day your company goes IPO, making you a multimillionaire or a billionaire? The day you become partner at your big corporate law firm? The day the art you created gets exhibited at a prestigious gallery show? The day the movie you directed gets released in theaters? The day you become a tenured professor at a prestigious university with a guarantee of lifetime employment. The day you win the Nobel Prize. Now, think about what your life would look like 1 year after your professional dream has come true. How do you think you'll feel? And what will you be doing day to day? Remember when you were admitted to NUS? How did you feel then? You were probably thrilled, even ecstatic. How did you feel 3 months after your admission? 1 year after your admission? Did you feel like you had already achieved more prestige than the vast majority of humanity, which is true, so you didn't need to accomplish anything else? That you didn't need anything more to satisfy yourself, your parents, and your relatives, that you were happy forever? I'm gonna guess probably not. I went to Harvard for college, and as a Yale professor, I think I can credibly say that in the US, there is not a bigger university brand name than Harvard. So you might think that Harvard is the happiest place on earth, like Disneyland. Let me tell you that a lot of my classmates were quite unhappy during their years at Harvard. I recently attended my 25th Harvard reunion, an event on the Harvard campus to mark 25 years since my college class graduated. And so all of us were invited to come back onto campus. Now, some of my classmates who came said that they had avoided the Harvard campus for the past 25 years because of the pain and the confusion and the ambivalence they felt about their years at Harvard. One classmate wrote on Facebook about the reunion, "I plan to return to make peace with this school, this time in my life, this complicated part of my identity, and to finally close the door." Spoiler alert for your life, these accomplishments that are in your future will be satisfying when they happen, but that satisfaction is going to be temporary, just like your reaction to getting into NUS. Harvard psychologist Tal Ben-Shahar has coined the term the arrival fallacy to describe the commonly held illusion that once we attain some goal, we will achieve lasting happiness and fulfillment. Documentary filmmaker A.C. Shilton wrote that when she finished filming her Netflix docuseries, The Innocent Man, she sat in her truck and cried. An empty work schedule yawned before me, and I was sure that my most meaningful achievement was in my rearview mirror. Professional basketball player Ray Allen has written that after he won his first championship, as the days wore on, there was a part of me that felt empty. I'd always believed that when you win a championship, you're transported to some new, exalted place. What I realized was that you are the same person you were before. And if you are not content with who you are, a championship or any other accomplishment isn't going to change that. In 2005, I found myself at a dinner party in New York City with Max Levchin, one of the co-founders of PayPal. Just 3 years before that party, Max and his co-founders had sold PayPal to eBay for $1.5 billion. Max told me that night that in the wake of that sale, he found himself mired in depression, feeling worthless and stupid. The depression Max went through after the sale of PayPal has been extensively covered in the press, so I'm not betraying any confidences by telling you this. It's not just the arrival that's disappointing. Paulina Porskova was a supermodel in the 1980s. This is an industry where girls are selected for their exceptional physical beauty. And then what happens? Porskova says, "I don't think any 15-year-old girl will turn down the chance to be called beautiful. You don't realize at that point that you are also going to be called ugly. The thing that you are best at, the thing for which you were hired, the thing that provides you a sense of accomplishment and identity and self-worth, that's exactly the thing that is going to be picked over, criticized, and called lacking by the world. Indra Nooyi retired a few years ago from the position of CEO at PepsiCo. She is one of the most distinguished female business leaders in the world, one of the most distinguished alumni of the Yale School of Management, where I teach. This is what one news article had to say about her on the eve of her retirement. PepsiCo investors should be happy. CEO Indra Nooyi is out because the trailblazing executive was a hindrance to the beverage giant's progress. The article notes that Pepsi's stock price gained only 73% over her tenure, far short of S&P 500's 112% rise, and that stock price performance lags even further behind Coca-Cola. How about Nooyi, what Nooyi said about herself in 2014? She said, "We plan our lives meticulously so we can be decent parents. But if you ask our daughters, I'm not sure they will say that I've been a good mom. I'm not sure." Nooyi has shared this letter from her then 4-year-old daughter. "Dear Mom, please, 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 please come home. I love you. I'd love you more if you came home." On her last day at work at Pepsi, Nooyi wrote this on a LinkedIn post. "I've been blessed with an amazing career. If I'm being honest, there have been moments I wish I'd spent more time with my children and family." In response to the question of whether working as hard as she did makes her a good role model for women, she responded, "Probably not." The feeling of disappointment with accomplishment is nothing new. Thousands of years ago, the biblical book of Ecclesiastes was written by a man who was king of Israel. Among the many famous quotes from the book is, "There is nothing new under the sun." The author describes himself as having successfully pursued intellectual accomplishment. He cheered himself with wine, he partied wildly, he undertook great building projects, he became rich, he acquired a harem. He writes, "I deny myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun." So happiness by itself, not enough for a good life. Accomplishment by itself, not enough for happiness. But is accomplishment by itself enough, at least for a good life, even if it doesn't bring happiness? The author of Ecclesiastes opens his book with his diagnosis of the problem he faces and the problem that we all face. Meaningless, meaningless as the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Why is everything meaningless? The author writes this: "The wise have eyes in their heads while the fool walks in darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. For the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise too must die." Imagine that you spend years writing a book. As soon as you're done, somebody walks in to the office and presses a button to delete all copies of the book, electronic or otherwise, that you have been laboring on. How does that make you feel about the effort you put into the book, the meaningfulness of the task? If you had known that this was going to happen, what would that do to your motivation to write the book in the first place? Would you feel like the task was more meaningful and enjoyable because the book would only exist in complete form for a few seconds? At least for me, it makes the task a lot less meaningful and enjoyable, knowing that this is what's going to happen to the fruit of my efforts. And that's what death does to everybody. It presses the delete button on us and on all of our work. Now it's time for a pop quiz. Do any of you know who any of these people are? If you do, raise your hand in Zoom. I don't see any raised hands. Let me tell you who these people are. Edward Harriman was one of the richest men in America in the 19th century, a railroad executive who was worth a couple billion in today's dollars when he died in 1909. I had no idea who he was until I found him in Wikipedia. Sarah Bernhardt was a 19th century French actress who was called the most famous actress the world has ever known. Well, I never knew her, and she died in 1923. Lawrence Klein won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1980. His Nobel citation says that few, if any, research workers have had so many successors and such a large impact. I have a PhD in economics. I am a professional economist. I never heard of this guy until I went searching on the internet for famous economists I had never heard of. Even after reading his Wikipedia entry, I have only the vaguest sense of what he won the Nobel Prize for. You might object that you don't know these people because none of them are Asian, but I've chosen to ask you about these three people because I've asked hundreds of Yale students over the years whether they recognize these three people, and so far, zero of them have recognized any of these three. Let's face it, you and your life's work will almost certainly be swiftly forgotten after you die. Look at how obscure these extremely accomplished people who died within the last 100 years are to us now. And 100 years is a tiny blip in the sweep of history. If you think you are going to somehow achieve immortality for yourself through your accomplishments, that's not going to happen. As the author of Ecclesiastes realized, whether you accomplish a lot or a little, whether you do good or evil, you will be forgotten, and it will soon be as if you had never lived. I regularly tell my Yale students that the greatest scarcity they will face in their professional lives is not a scarcity of opportunity, but a scarcity of meaning. I believe the same will be true of you. Viktor Frankl was a Jewish psychologist who survived the Holocaust. Man's Search for Meaning is the book he wrote based on the experiences that he had in the Nazi concentration camps. It is cited as one of the 10 most influential books in the United States. In the book, Frankl quotes Nietzsche: "He who has a why to live for can bear with almost any how." If we are to be happy in a good way, not the artificial empty happiness of the lotus eaters, then it's essential for us to know the why of our lives. But, that's not enough either. A sociopath might decide that he lives in order to inflict pain on others, and he obtains great pleasure and happiness from that. We should not judge the sociopath to be happy in a good way, to be leading an admirable life. It's not enough to have a why for your life. It must be a good why. The author of Ecclesiastes opens his book declaring everything to be meaningless. What is his resolution to this problem? The ending of the book goes like this: "Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil." Your first reaction to this might be, what an odd way to conclude a book about the struggle with meaninglessness. But if you think about it, the conclusion makes perfect sense. If God will eventually bring every deed into judgment, then everything we do matters. Nothing is truly forgotten. Nothing truly disappears. Good is rewarded and evil is punished. We have a why, and it's not an arbitrary why or an evil why, but a good why: to live in accordance with God's commandments. I'm a Christian, so living in accordance with what God made me to be is my why. A big part of what God made us all to be is to love and to be loved. A specific thing I believe God made me to be is, believe it or not, a finance professor. The book of Proverbs in the Bible says, "It is the glory of God to conceal a matter, to search out a matter is the glory of kings." The act of discovery is something that God calls glorious. And that's a big part of my job. I've devoted a lot of my research career to discovering what might help ordinary people manage their finances better. I believe that this is an act of love and service to those who can benefit from this knowledge. As an aside, I think that some of you may end up going into the finance industry, and I think that you really need to know, what is the purpose, the societal purpose of having a finance industry? Why is it that every major civilization has had a finance sector? If you don't know what societal purpose your job is creating or engaging in, then you're going to have a very hard time. And I urge you to really seek out, what is the purpose societally? What is the benefit to a society of having a financial sector? And when I used to teach corporate finance, this was part of what I tried to convey to my students. Why is it that every civilization needs finance? And to the aside, let me also talk about another facet of my job, which is to teach and to mentor students, to pass on the knowledge that we have and to help these students realize their potential. And this too, I see as an act of love and service. God has given me certain gifts, talents, and platforms. I believe that it pleases him when I use these to love and to serve. A why that's based on false premises is not a good why. Living by a why that is supplied by the Christian faith is not a good why if Christianity isn't true. The reason I believe Christianity is true is that it rests upon a claim that an objective, observable event happened in space and time. That there was this Jewish man named Jesus who lived 2,000 years ago, was executed on a Roman cross, but literally rose from the dead 3 days later. The Apostle Paul writes in the Bible that if that's not true, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. This means that Christianity is a religion that is subject to rational inquiry. We can be like historians or lawyers, examining the evidence to see if this resurrection really happened or not. And I, for one, am convinced that the evidence is quite good that Jesus did rise from the dead, based on the eyewitness testimonies from the time, the incentives of the witnesses to tell the truth, and the low likelihood that the witnesses could have been deceived or deluded. Even the famed atheist philosopher Antony Flew, who later did become a non-Christian deist, said that the evidence for the resurrection is better than proclaimed miracles in any other religion. It's outstandingly different in quality and quantity. I won't say much more about this for now, but I have written a short essay that's available on my website about why I believe Christianity is true. I think that everybody wants to contribute to something bigger than themselves. That's an essential part of every story we tell about heroes. They contribute critically to something bigger than themselves. Without that, they wouldn't be heroes. We crave this feeling so much that we watch movies and we read books that feature heroes so that we can live vicariously through their hero's quest. We play video games where we can pretend that we are the ones on a hugely important mission. As a Christian, I believe that I am part of a bigger story, God's story. And that gives me joy, which is a different thing than happiness. The Apostle Paul writes in a letter recorded in the Bible about the hardships he's undergoing because of his mission to spread Christianity across the Roman Empire in the face of intense opposition. He writes, "We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed." He is suffering. And it is not pleasant, may even be unhappy about it. But he goes on, "We do not lose heart, though outwardly we are wasting away. Yet inwardly, we are being renewed day by day. Why? Because he has a why. All this is for your benefit, so that the grace that is reaching more and more people may cause thanksgiving to overflow to the glory of God, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor, wrote in his book, "In some way, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning, such as the meaning of a sacrifice." The same set of circumstances, the same challenges, the same suffering, can have a very different impact on a person's well-being, depending on whether the person has a why. A person who has a good why and is acting in accordance with it has joy. The great architect Christopher Wren was commissioned to rebuild St. Paul's Cathedral in London after the Great Fire of 1666. The story goes that Wren saw 3 workmen at the construction site. He asked each of them the exact same question: "What are you doing?" The first workman said, "I'm cutting the stone." The second workman said, "I'm earning 3 shillings and 6 pence a day." The third straightened up, squared his shoulders, and proudly replied, "I'm helping Sir Christopher Wren build this great cathedral." Find that great cathedral that you can help to build, and then help build it. It is impossible to be happy all the time, but with the right why, we can always be joyful.